is my absolute pleasure to talk to Torsten Hoffmann today. Torsten is an award-winning film director and producer. His debut with Bitcoin, The End of Money as We Know It, won 4 international festival awards, and his most recent documentary, Cryptopia, Bitcoin, Blockchains, and the Future of the Internet, also was a superb performance. Torsten, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. This is very exciting. I tend to talk very fast, but my passion about my film and talking about it comes through, hopefully. So slow me down if you have to.
All right, I'll try. I would love to get started because a lot of my subscribers are from Latin America, and so they probably haven't heard much about you or Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in general. They're just starting to get involved in the names and the different issues. So if you could tell us a little bit about your background and why you got interested in making a film, not just about crypto, but about money.
Yeah, so that was around 2013 is when so my background is in media. I represented many filmmakers and tried to do, Netflix deals for them. So I was basically a sales agent for filmmakers, but I also have a strong interest in technology, obviously, and a bit of a degree on finance. So when I found out about Bitcoin back then, it kind of immediately clicked for me. Like usually when people hear about Bitcoin, right, the first thing is, okay, it must be a scam, it cannot work. It takes a while, right? It takes thousands of hours of research. But maybe for me, it was like a little bit faster. And for me, it was then the logical step. Oh, instead of just helping other filmmakers with their films, why don't I start to make my own film? And the first one, Bitcoin, The End of Money, was very much lower budget, my first project with a very experienced filmmaker as a partner. And Cryptopia, with the film that you just saw a couple of weeks ago, is obviously much, much more ambitious, bigger budget, more global production. And I'm pretty proud of that one as well.
Interesting. Yeah. I want to dive straight into the topic of your first film, actually, which is money. And I'd love to get actually a personal view because I always found that it's really, to understand Bitcoin, you really have to understand money, and you have to understand not just the relationship that everybody has around money, but our relationship with money. And I'd love to hear what your personal relationship is with money, or what sort of journey you've taken over the past years after you've discovered Bitcoin, or before even.
Yeah. Let me first maybe ask you. So in my perspective, and that might be wrong, but it feels to me that maybe in Latin America, South America, people might actually have a more nuanced view on money than in the rest of the developed world. So Argentina famously, right, with all their money problems, or Ecuador hasn't had a currency, Venezuela breaking down in front of our eyes in the last 10 years or so. I don't know, maybe even the whole Cuba thing over many, many decades. So I think people in Latin America maybe are more armchair economists than maybe in the West, where we never really think about money because it works so well and is relatively stable. Do you feel, is it just my imagination? Because I don't know your continent as well as you do.
I think actually Chile, because I'm based in Chile, is kind of protected from, or has been protected from, pretty crazy monetary situations like the ones we've seen in Argentina and Venezuela. We haven't dollarized or anything. So, and something that actually has always caught my eye here in Chile is that we don't really think about money too much, despite having our neighbors going through hyperinflation, going through big issues run on banks. And actually something that I really try to stress a lot in my newsletter and in these interviews is to really question the relationship with money, question what money's purpose is, because I see it on the street here that it just is a topic that doesn't really come out in conversations that often. We have a relatively stable inflation at around 2 to 3%. So it's not really a conversation. It's not really a topic that comes up a lot, despite having our neighbors all around us.
So interesting, yeah. So I'm originally German, and in Germany there was this period of hyperinflation, last century, and maybe that's still kind of in the zeitgeist, in the cultural or generational learning, maybe a little bit. that could be one assumption, but for me, so while I was doing my MBA, I wrote a case study or like a research paper on local currencies. So these were script monies, like paper currencies that cities usually, or like small areas where maybe there's tourism in the area, they establish these kind of paper currency for their town. So that money doesn't leave to the big financial centers immediately. So it kind of sticks and circulates around the area. And I wrote that paper in 2009 or 10. And then, like I said, 3 years later, when I heard about Bitcoin, it was kind of an easier thing for me. So maybe I was just lucky in that way.
You might have been lucky, but I mean, I think that you touched on a lot of strike of brilliance, I guess, to sort of really view Bitcoin as to what it can create around money, the questions that it causes, and yeah, the huge importance that it might have, or that it is having in the world today.
Yeah. Sorry, if I can just quickly jump in there. I mean, that is a whole different controversy, right? Because in the beginning, the first couple of years, so 2014, 15, 16, like the time that I made my first film and then it came out, this whole Bitcoin discussion was about money and a medium of exchange. Like people were saying, oh, it will replace, the dollar, it will replace the MasterCard. But let's be honest, that really hasn't happened. And I'm aware there's many currencies that are focused on that, and Lightning Network and all this. I'm very aware, but like let's be honest, that hasn't really been the killer application yet. Whereas in the last couple of years, this whole digital gold and Bitcoin is an asset class, that is kind of something new, and that seems to work for many people. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting to sort of see, and I suppose for you to see really those two sort of fields play together, because yeah, you saw it firsthand, the sort of the Bitcoin block size wars and the fight to make Bitcoin a day-to-day currency, and then the transition, because yeah, like you say, now Bitcoin is completely taken over by the sort of HODL or digital gold narrative. Which side are you on, if you're on either of the sides?
Yeah, look, I'm trying to be neutral, obviously, not be too strong pro or anti. I'm obviously a big fan of the technology and of the community as a whole. And I always said, look, the market will ultimately decide, right? And the market has decided that Bitcoin BTC is kind of like a store of value. It's much more valuable. But that doesn't mean that BCH, in this case, you mentioned the civil war, but all these other currencies, there might be, like even Dogecoin, which is kind of like a joke, right? But it has value because of the meme, the brand, right? Even though that I personally think it's a complete nonsense to put your money in, but some people do. And so I'm not a maximalist in that sense that I do think there's many different applications. Many of them we haven't even discovered yet, right? I'm also a maximalist in believing that Bitcoin, BTC, is our shot, our opportunity to kind of create a new asset class that hasn't been there before, that might challenge central banks, that might kind of unravel the financial system. And Ethereum is different. Ethereum is more like an operating system where this whole decentralized finance network is being built on. So they're different, but both very, very important.
Yeah, that is a controversial subject. And I do want to rewind a little bit, because I think that it's, and a point that you make that's central to the conversation is that to understand Bitcoin and to understand cryptocurrencies, you need to understand the current financial system, how it works, who's in charge. What would you say is wrong with the current money system, financial system, and yeah, the one that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are trying to displace or create an alternative for?
Yeah, I mean, there's many, and I think in Cryptopia I walk through many narratives, and that we see. But going back to the basics. So thanks for bringing me down back to basics. I mean, in Bitcoin, the End of Money, I kind of talk about mainly two things. I would say, let's just simplify that to two things. So first of all, we get rid of middlemen. Middlemen are usually not a good idea because we can't trust the banks. Banks are regulated, and we can't trust the government. Just the idea that you would have to seek someone else's permission to send money from Chile to London, where I'm at the moment, is kind of ridiculous in the the age of the internet, right? So the getting rid of the middlemen, I think, is one. And the other one, super easy to explain at the moment, is the trillions and trillions of dollars that are being printed by central banks, right? You see our normal money supply, our US dollar and euro and so forth, is going exponentially up. Whether you're in favor of stimulus tax or whether you're pro or anti the war in Afghanistan, $2 trillion, doesn't matter. The fact is, it's going up. So it kind of is logical that over inflation, over 100 years, the value goes down, right? And Bitcoin, as the first one, said, no, let's do it differently. Let's slow down the money supply. So every year or every 4 years, it gets lower and lower, the new issuance of coins, which means in theory, the value should go up. So it's kind of like a complete rethink of the entire money supply and what gives them value to money.
You touched on, I'd love to follow up on that last comment, because your first documentary, like you say, is very focused on money as such. What do you think gives value to money?
Well, first of all, let me say there's no intrinsic value in money, right? Let's just because I hear that still every other day. People arguing what is the intrinsic value of anything. Well, essentially, it's just the consensus that people have, right? So Bitcoin, as we see, sometimes can drop 20% or go up 20% on a day. So clearly, underlying the fundamental thing hasn't changed. It's just kind of a market-given price. But with fiat currency, all the supply is being given by the government or by one central party. So it's not a fair, it's not a free market. To answer your question more specifically, what gives value? I mean, I would just say it's a consensus among the participants in that economic system.
Interesting. I also agree that money in general doesn't have intrinsic value. There's actually there's a sort of philosophical field that says that the only thing with intrinsic value is happiness. And I've always thought of that pretty interesting because I also see it all the time within the Bitcoin community that there's this sort of Bitcoin has intrinsic value, and there's this fight to sort of reassert the idea that Bitcoin or money has intrinsic value, which is why we should be fighting to make it the dominant form of currency in the world. But yeah, I makes sense, that idea of consensus among participants. And I guess the role of trust as well is also.
Yeah, sure. 100%. Can I just, sorry, it's so interesting what you just said. There's two things I want to comment there. So let's look at the US dollar, right? I mean, clearly there is some sort of intrinsic or whatever you call it, value, because the government makes us pay, it taxes in that currency. So there's a natural demand for it. That would be one argument. Other people, like the hardcore libertarians, would say, well, it has value because it's backed by guns. Essentially, there's a government, right, with lots of tanks and soldiers behind it. That's another argument. But from a market perspective, I mean, look what's happening at the moment. There's 0% interest rates, and there's an infinite supply. So something is clearly not working quite right. And thank you for mentioning Bitcoin and intrinsic value, because there are people who say, well, Bitcoin is backed by energy, and what more like universal currency can there be than energy? The more energy you put in, the more stronger the network becomes, the more mining power I have, the more new, freshly mined Bitcoin do I get. So I buy this on a practical level. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, completely. I also think that there's this sort of, I'm doing a podcast with a friend of mine, and we were talking actually about that exact same, like the role that energy has in the creation of money, or the role that energy has in the creation of things in general, and how that energy can sort of be extrapolated to the value that something is given to, or how the money also has value. I'd like to talk about your most recent film, which was Cryptopia. Because I was on a panel last week talking about it, and actually for the subscribers of La Cadena, which is my newsletter, Torsten has graciously given us a link so that we can watch that for free, which is very exciting, and thank you very much, Torsten, for that. And You do the three acts, which is Bitcoin, then blockchains, then the future of internet, is really interesting because you go through sort of ideals or ideas surrounding these different topics. And I recall in Act One, which is Bitcoin, which goes through eliminating the intermediary, which you spoke about before, being your own bank, escaping inflation, separating money from state. Is there any specific one of those ideals, at least according to, or like diving deep into Bitcoin, that really resonated with you? Or was it maybe the whole combination of all of them that was like, yes, this is why this makes sense, rather than one over the other?
Yeah, a very good question. I mean, personally, I like the aspect of Bitcoin is freedom, or cryptocurrency brings freedom, so we're not shackled to our old regulatory or financial system. But that's kind of overarching, I would say. And as a journalist or filmmaker, I'm just interested how these all interplay and they build up. Right, this whole store of value wasn't really a thing until more recently, and it shifts and changes, and then there's different parties trying to sell us different ideas, or like splitting the blockchains. That is fascinating to me. And then the whole, the second act, the whole blockchain industry didn't exist when I made my first film. And then suddenly there's another $1 trillion industry appearing, mostly built on Ethereum, that didn't exist before. So it's fascinating to see the growth and all these new applications that are happening. And unfortunately, I don't have much DeFi in the film yet because, I made it a while ago. A new film would be like even more fascinating, of course.
Yeah, that's actually a question that I got asked when I said that I was going to do an interview with you, which is there going to be a third film about Cryptopia, or a follow-up to a Cryptopia in a few years, to sort of take a deeper dive into what I guess all of us in the cryptocurrency industry hope will be the dominant form of money, of cooperation, of collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to do one. I'm actually also pretty immersed in the virtual reality metaverse industry, and kind of I feel like the blockchain based protocols, money for sure, currencies, but also identity, things like that will kind of merge with the internet, and we're going to live in a totally different future. So that would be a perfect topic for the next film, especially me being a creator myself, because we're all going to be content creators. We're all going to be like NFT minters or investors, right? So it is super interesting, but honestly speaking, it's super hard to finance films, even though Cryptopia has gone to hundreds of millions of TV homes and it's doing very well on Amazon Prime. It's just such a long process, and I haven't really started thinking about the next one yet.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. You touched on something that I would like to touch on, because you also touch on it in the documentary, which is the future of the internet and the metaverse. Could you explain in your own words what the metaverse is and what you think the metaverse will create for us, or what will be sort of our role inside the metaverse?
Essentially, it's kind of like a sci-fi vision that came up with Snow Crash is a famous novel. The other famous sci-fi both book and movie is Ready Player One, which is Steven Spielberg has done a couple of years ago. So it's the idea that kind of we're all going to wear virtual reality masks, which of course they will become smaller and smaller, and they will just be like contact lenses sort of thing, right? Or maybe not virtual reality, but augmented reality. So we have a digital overlay onto the world. And basically we will be, as avatar, moving around in these virtual world, similar to online games nowadays, Fortnite and so forth. And the idea is that we have unique clothes and unique currencies to these systems. And then we can seamlessly go from the Facebook Oculus ecosystem to a different decentralized land or something like that. And it sounds a little bit sci-fi, but let's be honest, we already kind of live virtually most of the time on Zoom, on email, on Facebook, if you still use that platform, right? So we are very near, we're just maybe not as immersed yet, but technology will make it more immersive.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. We do live a very large majority of our lives digitally. I mean, I don't think it's been a while since I've even left home without my mobile phone, or the amount of time that we check our digital lives. It's strange how these sort of two lives, I guess, the real world and the digital world, the space between the two has seen a sort of gray area, and there's this sort of fusion between them, which is, I guess, a bit daunting at the same time as it is exciting to sort of reach out into what's next. But touching on the current, for example, state of the internet, are you inside the group of people that is not happy with the state of the internet? Because I mean, within the cryptocurrency world, there's this huge strive to decentralize everything, and especially inside the digital world, there's a few platforms that take up all our attention and live within these sort of strange closed circuits of algorithms. So what do you think about the internet nowadays, and how do you see it moving forward, especially with Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other cryptocurrencies that are sort of paving the way for something a little bit more democratic and decentralized?
Yeah, which, by the way, is a good criticism against a lot of the crypto projects and blockchain companies, right? They claim to decentralize everything, but they just run on two different nodes, or like 10 people or 10 organizations have 80% of the supply. And so you always want to be a bit careful, and it takes experts like yourself to kind of uncover some of that. Look, I do think the state of the internet is very unfortunate. In my film, I call it splinternet, which isn't the term that I invented, but kind of different nations shut off the internet, or have firewalls, or have a total control over censorship of whatever the government doesn't like you to say. And it's becoming pretty scary. And I think with blockchain technology, we have the opportunity to kind of decentralize it. It will be a long, long way. And I mean, Google and Facebook and so forth are very, very powerful. They're larger than nation states nowadays. So it's not going to be a smooth transition, but there's pockets of hope, and the creator economy that I mentioned earlier is part of that hope, right? We can now make our podcast or our films and monetize them ourselves. We don't need any middlemen or big platforms necessarily anymore, and we can earn Bitcoin instead of maybe some other currency that's being blocked because, I mean, just last week, did you hear that news about OnlyFans, that sex webcam thing, and suddenly they say, "Nah, sorry, no nudity allowed," or something, right? I mean, it is scary for a lot of people who are like not in the regular employment world, and these tools give us freedom for sure.
Yeah, I also think that for the creator economy, cryptocurrencies do come to serve a quintessential role in different forms of monetizing, different forms of capturing audiences, which is pretty exciting to sort of be also a content creator at the front of those that are trying to establish new mechanisms and new ways for how content gets created, gets spread, gets monetized, gets valued. You've spoken, I want to sort of switch, I guess, maybe gears, or because you've spoken a lot about freedom. And I also think that Bitcoin is freedom. But I'd love to hear your opinion on what you think the role of government is surrounding Bitcoin. And because I know that within the Bitcoin community, within the crypto community, there's a large amount of people that say that Bitcoin is freedom. A lot of the reason because it's resistant to confiscation, to censorship, to control from the government. So what do you think that government's role should be around this technology?
Yeah. Wow, yeah, such a big question. So I wanted to start where you just started with some of the hardcore folks who say we don't need Bitcoin. We will have our own citadels and just pay and earn Bitcoins. We're all going to be free. That's a utopia, and utopia is not a new idea. I've just been reading a book about I don't know, hundreds of utopias that's been exposed. Look, governments are not going to go away. In fact, you might argue that in times of COVID, government has become more strong, right? And the what's it called? The nanny state is becoming more and more. And actually, the younger generations are, they want the universal basic income. They want to get rid of the big, powerful corporations and kind of tone down the pure capitalism, pure market-oriented place. So I think there's a lot of forces that are maybe making governments even stronger. Whether you like it or not, maybe you can move to another part of the world, but I think government aren't going away. So you're 100% right in asking what is government's role in kind of regulating and helping. And I think there we have a good market mechanism, because some countries have banned Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. And what happens? They're not part of that innovation, right? The most talented developers move away. The most richest investors move away to other places where maybe this technology gets promoted. Like even within America, you have Wyoming and Miami and Texas that is pro, right? And some other states that are against. So I think we will see that play out in the next decade or so.
Yeah, it'll be, I also think that governments should play a role. I'm not going to go into too much detail whether it should be a good big government, small government, nanny state, police state sort of. But I do think that they do have a role, and I think it makes sense for them to sort of, embrace the innovation and not try and drown it with regulation. And I'd love to hear actually what you like on the ground with it, what you've seen in, for example, England and the countries that you visited. What your view is, or what you've seen governments do. Is there anything that you've seen that they are doing, or has there still been too much distance?
Yeah, I mean, look, all the major arrows point in the right direction. I would say. I mean, pretty much everywhere. You always see some news that are like, China bans Bitcoin for the 20th time. You always see some of those, and the negative news travels faster. But let me actually say something which I never really thought about, but meeting all these entrepreneurs and startup founders and the people who build businesses, Bitcoin exchanges and blockchain companies, I don't think any one of these people that I met over the years would say, oh, we don't need government and we want government to go away. I think they all want good regulation, just like what you just said. And good regulation might be as simple as, okay, we leave you alone for the next couple of years. That happened with the internet early on. The internet was kind of the same, like controversial and child porn and only criminals there in the beginning, right? And then it evolved into a big trillion-dollar industry. And the same is happening here. So I agree with you 100%.
What have you learned over the years through filmmaking, through meeting all these people that have sometimes very contrarian views about how society works, how maybe you think society works? Is there any ideas or things that have really stuck that maybe you thought wouldn't stick?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether that's answering your question, but what I really encountered so many times in both films is kind of that whole concept of history repeats itself, right? What I just mentioned about the early days of the internet, early days of crypto, very, very many parallels. I have this Oxford professor talking about the automobile industry, and again, how regulators and the big incumbents, try to block that industry. And it's kind of like, and like even in financial history, and Bitcoin, the end of money, kind of talks about the first bailout, and we make it sound like it was the last big bailout in 2009, but it was actually in the Roman Empire, 2,000 years ago. So we see history repeat itself, and every time somebody talks about a big revolution or a big grand idea, it's probably not as grand or as new, which makes it different.
Yeah, I read a book not too long ago by John Kenneth Galbraith, I think I pronounced that well, about a history of financial euphoria, which is actually a really small book, but it goes over like the different financial bubbles and how history tends to repeat itself, and how sometimes new innovations come out and they are a sort of rhyming and a sort of mixing of history. I'm not saying obviously that this is all a bubble or anything, but it's interesting, that idea that history does repeat itself over and over, or in different ways it rhymes. And
by the way, maybe Bitcoiners are kind of more attuned to this because there's these cycles, right? These 4-year cycle and the halvening event. And today, I think 2 of my calls were about, early in the cycle, late in the cycle, and when it comes down, then this will happen. So we're kind of already planning for these waves, which is very helpful. Because you have to imagine, I mean, as an entrepreneur, right, you have to fundraise at the hot year and to get those hundreds of millions of dollars, and then you have to hunker down for 3 years or 2 years, where maybe the excitement slows down. And it does scare me because so much excitement at the moment is about the NFT and the metaverse and all this kind of stuff. And then, to survive 2 or 3 slow years will be tough, because I mean, we're competing against big governments and big internet giants, right?
Yeah, that's totally right. I guess we need to prepare for when we go into that sort of so-called crypto winter, and when it gets back down to sort of working and building, and when people are not very interested and there's not so much hype. And I think that leads me into a question that I wanted to ask you, which is, do you have any recommendations for people just getting involved in crypto, in Bitcoin, in blockchain technology?
Yeah. I do. Hold on, I had one more other thought, just about what you said about these cycles. Let's not get into whether NFTs are at the top or not, because I don't think either of us knows. Or do you have a strong opinion?
No, not yet.
Okay, good. Yeah. And okay, so recommendations. Yes, I mean, do your own research. Don't believe anything that or everything that you read on the internet. Especially in this industry, you have to realize that a lot of people, a lot of projects are just trying to sell you something and get money off of you, right? It's always about investment, this coin, this project, this NFT. So be super careful, even more than you would otherwise. And then just basic education. I mean, there's a few fantastic books. Andreas Antonopoulos is in both of my films. He has fantastic content, both on Bitcoin and on Ethereum, which are the 2 biggest and most kind of solid project in the space. My 2 films, I think, are pretty good introductions. So Bitcoin, the End of Money, Cryptopia, which you can find pretty much everywhere on the internet. A few other documentaries. And maybe try to avoid, maybe one other tip is try to avoid reading the daily news or the weekly news, because you also have to understand journalists. They have 10 minutes to research something, right, and then write a sexy headline and then the news. And it's impossible to understand this world if you don't have hundreds and hundreds of hours of research. And I'm actually just assisting a large German production. They want to do like a special on Bitcoin, and it's literally 3 editors. They have no idea, no background about this, and they have to put together this show within 4 weeks, and it's impossible, right? I've been doing it for 7 years. I'm part of this community, and even I probably get still a few things wrong. So yeah, it's maybe have a longer, what's it called, time preference, right? So read the books rather than the tweets, so to speak.
Yeah, that excellent recommendations, and I like that idea of read the books and not the tweets. And just to close up, I'd love to hear your motivations. What keeps you going on a day-to-day basis, keeps on coming back to this industry or working in the industry that you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated just to see industries grow and blossom. So I've been fortunate to kind of been a little part of the first new economy, like when the internet first came out. That was just super exciting, very formative time for myself. So that's maybe number 1. Number 2 is actually I've started to become part of the creator economy. I never realized, never really used the word. I said film producer, I make documentaries, but now I actually. I'm talking to you. I'm still promoting my film that I did like so long ago, right? I wrote the script, and still people quote it on Twitter every week, and it is very gratifying. And I have to build the audience, and I'm excited about it because I made this thing, right? And as an independent filmmaker, same you as an independent podcaster and newsletter publisher. I mean, we really have to be passionate about our project, otherwise we wouldn't make it. It's just too hard.
Exactly. Well, Torsten, this was enlightening. This was very fun. And I really thank you for the time, the energy, and all the information.
Thank you so much for having me. And check out my film with a free link on your newsletter, and speak soon. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Muchas gracias por escuchar esta nueva edición de la cadena Pod. Si te pareció interesante la entrevista y el contenido, considera apoyarme. Toma tiempo y energía crear educación abierta y gratis para todo el mundo, y no estoy promocionando un producto, sino intentando aterrizar conceptos de educación financiera y Bitcoin que se enfocan en las increíbles posibilidades que esta tecnología nos trae. Si quieres apoyarme en esa misión, suscríbete a mi boletín informativo y apóyame en patreon.com/lacadena, donde puedes participar activamente y ayudar a crear mejor contenido para todos.